And I think the slides from the previous presentation around inflation, rates funding, CapEx and operating costs are worthwhile as we go into our next annual plan process. So it's worthwhile just having those in the back of your pocket. Look, this is the first formal update for elected members as we move into forming our 2026-27 annual plan. It's an early stage briefing. We don't have all the answers at this stage, but it does help us to understand the current financial position and the pressures that we're facing, and officers have pulled together this snapshot as of now. Now, we also know that rates affordability is a major issue that we're going to be addressing through our working party, then through into this committee. So there's going to be some tough choices in the future, but we're not making any of those decisions now. This is essentially a briefing for us all. And in terms of the briefing, you've all had the slides. So just to let you know that the slides regarding specific projects on the work program, we're just going to take those as read and really not focus too much on that, because you'll need more detail about dollars and timing and all of that. But we're going to focus on the actual process that we're heading into. And so I'll hand it over to officers now. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Sorry, me again, but I promise I won't do so much talking. I'll actually hand the talking stick over to Andrea. So we'll try and keep this reasonably short. So we'll just quickly go through the purpose of the annual plan. So because some of you are new, there'll be a budget update from Andrea. We'll talk through the short-term accommodation rate, which is something that you've requested next stage on. And then, like the Chair said, we won't go through the capital program, but we will talk through the timeline for the annual plan, so you've got some visibility of it for next year. So we've talked a lot about annual plans and LTPs, but in essence, an annual plan really focuses on the year that it relates to, and so it identifies, its purpose is really to identify and work through any changes to the LTP for that year that it relates to. So we've talked about the fact that if you make major changes in any given year, it requires an LTP amendment, but the purpose is for an annual plan is to make changes where they need to be made, consult your community, understand their views, make a final decision on any budget changes you want to make, and then strike the rates. So that's at a high level the purpose of the annual plan. And I'll hand it over now to Andrea, and she'll spend some time talking through the starting budget and where we've ended up.
Thanks, Vaz. Kia ora koutou. So a little bit just also to reinforce the process, as Vaz has talked about, whenever we start with the annual plan, we start with the long-term plan itself. And so we're starting with the year 3 of the 2024-34 long-term plan. Now, that long-term plan, when you looked at the rates figures, had a significant drop in year 3 because it reflected the fact that we are moving the rates charges for water into Te Aki Wai, and so there will be a separate billing process. However, the people that pay the Te Aki Wai water charges are the same people that pay rates. And so we are continuing a bit of a conversation around the rates inclusive of water, so we can understand the impact of the charges in total to communities, residents and commercial ratepayers. So when we strip out the impact of water, or when we include, the impact of water, what the LTP would have reflected would be a 12.7% rates increase. So not the big negative decrease, but the 12.7 increase. Obviously, when we're starting with year 3 of a long-term plan, we know that there are certain things that always move in between when you set the 2024 long-term plan and between now. and we pull all of those cost pressures and other adjustments together, and then we work through a significant process to say how many of those cost pressures can we absorb, what can we do to treat those cost pressures? Are there other ways of thinking about this? What else do we need to take into consideration? So that has been the process that we have gone through. So we've started with a 12.7% increase. We've worked through a process to say what are the big adjustments that need to be made, and an example of that is we did a revaluation of transportation assets last year. That recognised a significant uplift in the value of those assets, and corresponding to that, a significant increase in depreciation. And so as a result of that, and to set a balanced budget, ordinarily we would need to fund that depreciation. So that has been a cost pressure that we've reflected in here. We've had other cost pressures as well. We continue to see electricity prices and utility costs go up significantly. Software licences is a significant cost pressure. There are other cost pressures right throughout the organisation. There are also other things and other savings that we have been able to highlight. And so an example of that is the interest the expected interest charges. We have been able to save on those because interest rates are lower than anticipated. So there's ups and downs. And what those first two parts of the graph really reflect is those ups and downs that we've adjusted the budget for. We always also look at whether or not we're going to necessarily fund all of those increases, and whether or not there are some levers that we can pull to decrease the rates increase, and I'll talk about that in the unfunded depreciation column in a minute, which is 3.8, and of course we take out the impact of growth. So our starting position really is 9.4% rates increase. Of course, people will see that in two separate forms. They'll see that in a rates bill and a Te Ake Wai Metro Water bill. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. So that will be the increase overall. So we're starting at 9.4. That is, as the Chair has said, a starting position. So just to talk about those cost pressures and other adjustments. So I talked about the depreciation costs increase due to revaluation. We have done a lot of work to absorb inflation, and we have done a lot of work around vacant position management. We've identified cost pressures, and so I've talked about things like utility increases, software increases. There's a couple of others there's many others that sit within that, and there's obviously inflationary pressures as well. The executive leadership team, to mitigate some of those costs, went through a line-by-line review to identify savings and mitigations, and that work has been completed. However, we do recognise that the Revenue and Financial Value Working Party has now been established, and the next step is to work through the next set of reviews with that working group in order for them to provide advice to this committee as part of the next step. We do talk about this concept of unfunded depreciation, and I just wanted to make a few comments in this space. We depreciate our assets in line with accounting standards and good practice. That's a must. If we didn't do that, we would receive qualified audit opinions from our auditors. That's something that we need to do. But we do need to make choices about how we fund that depreciation. Now, in doing that, and what I mean by that is we may choose not to fund some assets depreciation because we may not renew those assets in the future. Equally, for transport assets, we wouldn't fully fund the depreciation because we have alternative revenue sources that support the renewal of those assets. So you're not funding depreciation wholesale. You need to make some strategic choices within that. That is an area that we need to do more work on and to bring some transparency, not only to this committee table, but I also think externally to the public. And we are working towards pulling together a depreciation strategy. So we've got a really clear narrative and people can understand that as part of the long-term plan. It's something that every single council across the country undertakes. in terms of whether or not they choose to fund depreciation or all of that. However, transparency around that is really key. We are suggesting and have pulled together a few options for this council in terms of whether or not we fund certain depreciation lines. We believe that we could give you advice around increasing the level of unfunded transport depreciation based on our level of NZTA funding. We think we may be recouping a bit too much in depreciation in that space. And we are also looking at whether or not we can change the depreciation funding for structures as well. And so these will be key decisions that we will need to bring to you to make. And again, we'll work through that with the Revenue and Financial Value Working Group in the first instance. But the reason we're referring it to you now is if we don't fully fund depreciation, what can happen is you don't set a balanced budget. And you as elected members need to actually consciously make that decision and vote accordingly. So you need to be comfortable with the advice that we're providing to you that it is a financially prudent thing to do, and we'll be working with you on that in the near future. That is probably all I was going to say on the budget outlook. Short-term accommodation, are you talking about this?
Do you think we could just take some questions?
Yeah, happy to.
Just on the budget outlook and the depreciation.
Yeah.
To start with, so short-term accommodation, we'll leave that, and everything else to another part. Councillor Randall. Oh,
Yes. So you outlined that there are cost pressures. What areas were the source of the greatest cost pressure increases?
Depreciation.
Okay. And also, what savings have already been included, areas of savings in the 2020, in terms of bringing it down? Because, I mean, certainly appreciate officers' work. I was wondering if you could identify if there are any significant areas where you've already included savings.
Look, there's been a whole raft of things that we have undertaken. So one area has been vacancy management. So where we've had vacancies, we've actually removed those vacancies out of our organisational structure. So we're not setting a salary for those within our future budgets. That's one area. We have consolidated a number of lines within our budget, and while that may result in savings of like $5,000, it all adds up. And so we've worked through that process. That's the kind of process that we've gone through in our line by line.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Foon.
So just to clarify, this amount includes water, but the heading at the top says generally that it will reduce, rates will decrease by 29%, but for this annual plan we are going through including water in our rates?
We're including the water component so that we are clear on our messaging to our community about the charges that they are facing. What they will receive is they'll receive a rates bill that is significantly less than what they would have received in the past because we take out the water charges, but they will receive a separate bill that says, here are your water charges. And so we're trying to put customers and ratepayers at the heart of this conversation so we understand what the full charges to households or commercial businesses are going to be. So they'll receive two separate invoices, but we're talking about conceptually the total of those two things.
Yep, great, thank you. And just to clarify, over what period of time will we continue that practice?
So the intent is that we undertake the billing for Te Aki Wai for, I'm trying to think of the financial year that we're even in, Councillor Foon, 26, 27. But I think we need to be continuing to consider affordability from what is the wider perspective that we're passing on to our community. And so that also includes, and I should note, those figures also include the sludge levy. Yep. But as we talk about rates increases, we're increasingly looking at, and within the rates affordability work, Greater Wellington rates charges, our rates charges, the sludge levy, water charges, so that we're building a picture of general costs that our services or services are being provided to ratepayers or households.
Great. So sorry, this will continue for how many years?
So as we work into the long-term plan, we'll start to separate out those two conversations, I would anticipate, but we'll still need to have that front of mind.
Yeah, great. Okay, cool, thank you. Just, you talked about the revaluation of our transport assets. Could you clarify the figure for that?
I don't have it to hand, but I can
Get
send that
someone to
around.
email that
Yep.
through, thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Little.
Thank you. Just 3 questions on the section about savings and mitigations in the line-by-line review. You refer to savings and mitigations to cost pressures, no impact to levels of service. I'm just interested to know what you mean by levels of service,
Yeah.
bearing in mind that reorganisation can achieve productivity improvements that don't change level of service but can create cost efficiencies.
Yeah. So typically when we're talking about levels of service, we mean that the service that the community receives from this council, and those are decisions that that need to be made around this table. So when we've been looking at those kind of decisions, we're actually saying we can perform the same task for this cost. And so that's what we're looking at. Certainly as part of the Revenue and Financial Value Working Group, I would expect us to have conversations around could we decrease this level of service? Yeah.
Okay. And then just in relation to depreciation, you refer to, you give examples, talk about archives digitisation project. Recognising as operating instead of capital, and you recommend that it is debt funded as it's capital in nature. There'll be a cost associated with that. What is kind of the trade-off there?
Yeah.
Perhaps, and then also in relation to depreciation, you refer to increasing the level of unfunded transport depreciation based on NZTA funding. Can you just explain the significance of that?
Yeah. So firstly, in the archives digitisation project, I'll just give a wee bit of background. So we are working and doing significant work to digitise our archives, and we have been proposing to capitalise that and debt fund that. That's the assumption that we have made in our long-term plan previously. As part of the last audit that was undertaken for the year ended 30 June 2025, our auditors disagreed with our accounting treatment for that. And they said that they felt that this was more in line with operating costs. Now, we were very late in the audit process when we received that advice. We still disagree with that advice. We are comfortable that it should be treated as capital in nature. However, we accepted their position at the time because we didn't have time to debate the issue given the lateness of their conclusion. So we are still comfortable that we treat this akin to capital in nature because, in effect, we're creating an asset that has greater longevity in the form of a digitised archive as opposed to a physical archive. And it also enables us to manage our archive space in a more modern but accessible way, and minimises our cost to running archives as well because we don't have to have the space. So we're proposing that we still treat that as capital in nature and therefore debt funded. So that's our proposal. However, that is slightly different from what we say in our revenue and financing policies, which says that anything that is operational expenditure in nature should be rates funded. So that's what we're asking you to make in terms of the policy decision. It's very kind of accounting nuanced.
But there's still, if it's debt funded, there's still a cost associated with that. So what's
Absolutely.
for the trade-off there? That we're
Absolutely correct, and we had budgeted for it as being debt funded and paying that off over a longer period of time. What we would now expect if we were to treat this as rates funded, we would be paying for it up front. So it's just a transition in timing of when we would pay for that cost, paying off the debt over a period of time versus paying for the cost up front. So that's the archives digitisation process. The level of unfunded transport depreciation based on NZTA funding, we receive fixed rate of around 51%, I think our FAR rate is, from NZTA. So we receive a significant amount of funding for our roading work. And so we shouldn't be charging or funding depreciation for that component. We don't now, but we are proposing within this policy to be a bit more aggressive with that approach, so that we fund less based on depreciation and take more risk that we are going to get more funding in different areas based on NZTA. Now, we need to work through that. We've got a policy position on that. However, what I would say is you need to see the depreciation strategy as a suite of decisions that you're making, and that's what we're trying to pull together for you to make that informed decision. And whether that's, because essentially if you're not funding it now, the question is are you kicking the can down the road? And you need to be informed around that.
Can I just ask a supplementary on that? If we take that approach in relation to the NZTA funded stuff, then if the NZTA formula changes at some point in the future, then
Correct.
then presumably our approach in terms of accounting for depreciation for those assets has to change.
Absolutely, that's absolutely correct. And you would look to make sure that you've suitably ring-fenced those funds. That's the principle that you would need to follow. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, for getting that depreciation clarified. Did you have another question? Because you said you had three.
That was three.
In fact, I asked four.
Oh, I know, but they were sort of related. So I was very, not just because you're the mayor, but I thought it was very interesting. So the next I've got on the list is Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Chung, and Councillor Compton, and then Councillor Tiffenbacher. So Councillor O'Brien.
Yeah, you just mentioned before that other councils make some different decisions on depreciation. I was just wondering if you could expand on that slightly and maybe how we stack up.
Yeah. Look, I haven't done any analysis recently of depreciation funding of other councils. I think there are a wide variety of practices and timeframes. So many councils, when they have revaluations, they will phase revaluation impacts over a period of time, so that they don't immediately increase rates and have that impact. In fact, we took that decision in 2022, I believe, for our water revaluation, and so we're not fully funding depreciation on that now. So councils make those decisions all the time, and have different ways of phasing that. Our neighbouring councils are like Upper Hutt and Porirua, Porirua for a really long time, and I'm going back probably before you could walk, Councillor O'Brien, when, they had a relatively new infrastructure, and so they didn't need to fund that depreciation immediately because they were looking at their entire strategy and going, actually, for this period of time, we don't need to fund this. But they are moving towards that now. So there's many different strategies that could be deployed in that space.
Councillor Chung.
Great, thanks. So I have two questions. The first one is that you mentioned that we are not going to fund depreciation on some assets because we're not going to be replacing those. Are you in a position at the moment to comment on what they might be, apart from transport?
We need to work through a large number of those, but a deliberate decision was made by the previous committee around Tākina. So, for example, we depreciate Tākina as a building. We recognise that charge, but we're not funding the depreciation on that building because if we were to replace Tākina in the future, we may look to fund that differently than building up a reserve to do so.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. And second question is regarding the NZTA increasing the subsidy on transport. What is the process that we have for fare increases on public transport? Do we actually do that, or is that all Greater Wellington Regional Council, or do we have any input into fare increases at all?
I don't think I'm well placed to answer the question around the FAR. I'm not directly involved in those processes. I know they do review the FAR periodically, but I'm not sure of the process that we follow to provide input in that.
Okay,
Apologies, Councillor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Compton, online.
Good morning. Thanks, Andrea. Just in terms of level of service, I understand if it's a major change, then we'd have to go out for consultation. What if it's a service that's not yet implemented? For example, either the demolition of the Frank Kitts car park or the organic waste. Would we have to go out for consultation if we just moved those costs out further years? Or do we have to go out for consultation on those?
The short answer is it depends, and I'm looking at Baz as well. So what we do need to do is we need to look at the commitments that we have made in the long-term plan, because that's our, I guess that's our North Star in terms of what is guiding and what the decisions have been made previously. In terms of levels of service, we identify those mainly through the KPIs that we have committed to delivering with the community in that space. However, when you're rephasing capital expenditure, it can be a little more nuanced than just saying we plan to do it in this year, because for many capital programs, they're over multiple years. So rephasing that is unlikely to have an immediate impact on levels of service or what was anticipated. And of course, that is why the long-term plan is revisited every 3 years as well, to enable those kind of decisions to be made. Is there anything you would add to that, Baz?
No, you've covered it. Thank you.
Okay, is that it? Councillor Tiffenbarger.
Can I get 3 questions, please? So with the cost pressure and adjustments not being included in the starting point, a lot of them are actually quite predictable, like obviously the increase in value of things and so forth. So if we hadn't have done that on that this year, we would have been looking at 18.8% increase. So the decisions made around the long-term plan have actually imposed effectively an 18.8% increase on rates on this, unless we find reduction. So unless we put a contingency into that number, we're forever looking at what can we cut the following year. So doesn't it make sense to have a contingency in that number for the appreciation that you know that's going to come anyway?
So there has been unders and overs in the movements that have happened. So, you know, that is part of the work that, and it's a bit of a proxy for cost pressures, because, you know, when you work through the cost pressures of the organisation, you go out to the organisation and you say, where are the cost pressures? And part of this is an ELT exercise to then go, well, actually, I've got the cost pressure in this business unit, but in this business unit, I can perhaps absorb it. And so that's the exercise that we've done. So it's not as nuanced as saying this has all gone up and this has gone down. And you need to work through that process, and that's what we've tried to reflect. We always make the best assumptions that we can in the long-term plan as we're preparing it, and that includes inflation indices and what we know could be coming along the pipeline. We get the inflation indices from Taitoa, and in the earlier presentation, Baz referred to those indices because they are more about local government cost pressures, i.e. the concrete, I think you gave an example of, but the bitumen, the things that affect our cost pressures, not the price of bread, milk and cheese, because we purchase very little of that. So we do have a level of information there, but we wouldn't normally put in those contingencies, because the whole purpose of the annual plan is to balance these things out. The only thing certain about a long-term plan is we know that it's not going to transpire in exactly that way, because there'll be unders and overs at any point in time.
Yeah, but you can see my point that we're only 6 months after the long-term plan effectively got implemented, and we're going, it's now 6% more. So the decisions we're making on the long-term plan are, you know, we are looking at a certain outcome and trying to get things down, but we're only getting them down on what we know. So if we chucked in a contingency, then it would be so much, it might just come up with better decision making for the long term.
Yeah, so not quite in terms of the long-term plan amendment. So one of the things so the long-term plan was only amended for certain scenarios. And so what we didn't do during that long-term amendment was adjust many of the assumptions that we had. The amendment was to adjust for the capital program and also the impact of water reform. and the NZTA decrease in funding that we received. So what we didn't do as part of the LTP amendment was adjust all of the base inflation numbers, adjust population assumptions, all of those things. So while we amended the long-term plan, we're still working on the figures that we predominantly had in the beginning of 2024, essentially. So we're using those as the inflation indices, not the ones that we didn't update accordingly. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No. And I wasn't having a go. It was just like, should we be allowing for this stuff going forward? To get
absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And the next thing is with rate capping, because there's things in our long-term plan that might start in the next year, should the annual plan be looking quite carefully at the forward costs of those projects? Just because obviously if rate capping comes in, we can't start summing off in the annual plan that's then going to inhibit our ability to meet our obligations going forward.
I think that will most probably and most definitely be a consideration of the Revenue and Financial Value Working Group as they look through this process.
Cool. And maybe just one more, if that's okay.
Yes, you may.
So the water increase, obviously, is that tied at all to our increase? Because obviously if we go up by 9.4% and water goes up by 15%, the impact on the obviously the user is relevant rather, and if they go up by 3%, then obviously it looks like a whole lot less, but we've done nothing to actually achieve that.
Yes, so it's all interrelated. So we do need to be careful about that within our narrative. However, water rates are set based on the expenditure and the investment that we were anticipated making in the network, and that was done through advice from Wellington Water. Te Aki Wai are taking that same advice and will be billing for that, but over the time, through the water strategy, that will change as Te Aki Wai take control of the assets.
Okay, Councillor Rogers. Thank you for your patience.
I guess, my question was just around the quantum for the unfunded transport depreciation, and you mentioned it might come into the policy more broadly, but I guess are you implying a move towards, say, 49% depreciation on our transport assets?
I don't have the exact figure. Can I come back to you on that?
Yeah, of course. And then the other question that I was going to ask was also related to those same water charges, and it's, I guess, slightly different because it's partially Te Aki Wai's problem, but I was looking at the new covenants that LGFA announced last week for water CCOs, and in particular around the need for entities to have some grace period in the first 5 years, and that has to be negotiated, like it's not just provided by default. So I guess, do we have much confidence at the moment over, yes, they are going to be setting them at those rates, or they're going to need to be setting them higher as they acquire the debt that the council's passing over?
I think that work will be apparent when we get the water services strategy, and I think they're aiming for March. Is that right? They'll still need to work through that.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one question, then we will go on to short-term accommodation, because I know we're on a tight time frame. But can you tell me, you talked about how the executive have gone through a line-by-line review. Are you able to identify the amount that you were able to identify through savings and mitigations?
Not directly, because what we did is we looked at the cost pressures and where those cost pressures could be absorbed. So they weren't necessarily direct savings anyway, because they were about inflationary pressures, and we looked more about how they could be saved. So there was the conversation was more broad than just what are we going to cut here. It was how do we absorb these cost pressures. So, for example, there were $20 million of cost pressures that we had coming up, and we looked at absorbing all of those cost pressures. Some we were successful in doing, some we were not, but we looked at the net mainly.
Okay, thank you. So we'll just move on to the short-term accommodation part.
Great. So just in May of this year, the committee decided to introduce a new general rates differential for short-term accommodation. This is actually what we had within our own existing policies, but we weren't necessarily charging short-term accommodation providers that rate. What we were asked to do was to start to look at implementing that policy, but we would consult via the annual plan to have that conversation with the community. So the proposed differential is 2.6, so short-term accommodation providers would be charged 2.6 over and above the standard residential rate for short-term accommodation providers. We are looking at defining short-term accommodation providers by the use of entire houses or units rented for greater than 1 month and available to rent more than 60 days of the year. So we're not talking about granny flats, sleep outs, those kind of things. We are talking about those that are listed on Airbnb, for example, for a period that's greater than 60 days and is actually available to rent. That is a challenging thing for us to be able to identify and do, but it isn't uncommon across the sector. So there are other councils across the sector that take the same approach, and there are increasing ways to be able to identify properties as a result as well. So we would be looking to consult via the annual plan on this policy.
Mayor Little?
Obviously, I wasn't here for the when this decision was made. I have to say I'm deeply opposed to it. I'm interested to know whether there's been any projection of cost based on, or any forecast revenue that also takes into account the likelihood that there'll be a number of people currently doing this who would exit doing it, and the cost of enforcement, given that this would be fall on the council. There's no kind of existing mechanism to oversee and enforce.
Yeah, I've just asked Vincent Kleinbrod to join us. So Vincent has been doing the modelling.
Thank you, everyone. Kia ora, councillors. Kia ora, Mayor. So we've done some internal modelling on how it would look like and what the expected drop-off is if we implement a differential of 2.6, and it's a very, very small percentage that would actually possibly stop to be in the market. Our differential, the 2.6, is also very, very close to what other councils charges their commercial differential. Auckland is close to 2.6, Hamilton is a bit higher at 2.9, Christchurch is a bit lower. So it's in the range of what other councils charge. On the identification, it is really, really challenging to identify a short-term accommodation provider, and it would be on a self-reporting basis initially, trying to build the trust, trying to emphasize reporting.
So if we just follow up, so I've been interested to know how you modelled it, and that you assessed there'd be a small number of exits, and then secondly, if we look at the average kind of level of rates on a Wellington property, these providers would have to generate an additional $8,000 of income, $8,000 to $9,000 of income, just to break even. And I'm just wondering how feasible that actually would be for most of the providers in this sort of end of the market.
Sure. So we got the data from AirDNA. They have data on the average revenue per night, and then we got our own rates data based on a differential general rates differential of 2.6, and we put them in relation as a percentage of the profit. And we got different sizes of short-term accommodation provider, and it all came that the occupancy profitability is somewhere above 62 days, and then we have that 60 days period where they won't be charged if they are just operating that small amount. I'm happy to go through the numbers one more time once we have the consultation, of course. Maybe things have changed since we have done that analysis, which was some bit of time ago, but yeah.
And I'm interested to know, you didn't respond to my question about the cost of enforcement. So you have to have personnel overseeing what's happening and keeping a track of what's in the market. And then there's got to be a collection mechanism, because we don't, apart from rates, we don't have a mechanism to do that and to enforce it. And presumably collection has to be some relation, proximate relation to when the accommodation providers are actually receiving the revenue? What is the cost of all that?
That's right, and we have not quantified that cost at this moment. In the past, for where we have run it, we said we need approximately 1 FTE for administration, identification of short-term accommodation provider.
Can I just make a comment? This is for the new elected members. This was a decision made last triennium, and it was seen as a way of spreading the pie a bit differently, so that it essentially wouldn't mean any more money for the council, but it might mean that, in particular, perhaps commercial ratepayers may be paying a bit less. What was it? But I think the challenge we had is that it was then a full analysis, a policy analysis had not been done, and I appreciate it sounds like officers have been doing some further work on it, which is good. But I might take this conversation offline, but I think we need to think about how we do get that policy paper, because whether we do go out to consult on this, because I do think we need some more information, just not necessarily probably to revisit it, because when we've got fuller information about whether we do want to put this into consultation. I appreciate we've made a decision last triennium, but I think if we've got more information coming in front of us, as we've seen, we may decide that decisions that have been made previously, because further information has become available, whether we need to reconsider our position. And we've got that coming up tomorrow in terms of with the motorcycle parking, or we've had it with the City to Sea Bridge. So I just want to put that there, but I think we do need to see some of that policy work that's been done since that decision was made, or analysis work that's been done to help us form whether we do put this into consultation.
So just to be clear, the analysis was undertaken to inform the decision that councillors made. We haven't updated the modelling since, and we would need to do that.
Okay.
So that analysis was provided for councillors to make the decision that they did in May 2025. However, notwithstanding that, it is totally up to this new elected council as to whether or not they want to continue with this policy position.
Yep, thank you. And I think that's something we'll discuss with the Mayor. Thank you. Councillor Randall.
So yes, that's what, just about how this thing's going to work. So you talked about it being self-reporting. What happens if someone doesn't self-report?
We continue to set the rate based on the residential or commercial charge that they are existing against. We don't have a mechanism to be able to do it any other way.
Okay. And what is the process or timeframes where someone who may have self-reported, who decides that they no longer wish to have that business with that house, what's the registration, deregistration process? That's just another part of the self-reporting, is it?
Yeah, so properties are classified within our rating system, and that drives what rates they are or aren't charged. And so we would have a classification for this short-term accommodation if we were to pursue this as a rate, and we would be reliant on those people to tell us when there have been changes in their circumstances to update that. There are different policies around that, so usually those kind of policies are that they are applied at the beginning of a rating year, and they continue to be applied for the rating year, but there are some exceptions to that as well. For example, if a property is classified incorrectly, we can adjust and rebate accordingly or remit accordingly.
And so our system...
Excuse me, Councillor Randall, I'm just conscious of time. I think we're getting into operational detail, and I think we need some more information to come back to us so that everyone around the table can make to reassess. So I appreciate your comments, but I think that's something we could, officers be able to come back to us generally about the overall proposal. Councillor Tiffenbacher?
That was pretty much it. I agree with the Mayor. We need to review it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions on short-term accommodation, bearing in mind that we will get some more information, that we can look at it more holistically? Okay. Right, final stage. And we'll take the work program in there as currently as read. So we won't go into, there's no time to go into details about any of those.
No, absolutely not. And so there's only a couple of slides left really there about the timeline. So, you know, the working party is scheduled to meet late Jan and through Feb, and the committee is scheduled to start thinking and looking at the budget in the middle of Feb and beyond, with an adoption of the CD scheduled for March. And then, of course, we follow the same old pattern where we go out for consultation for a 4-week period through that March-April period. We then do oral hearings. We always hear from about 50, depending on what we're consulting on, of course, depends on how many submissions we get and how many people turn up for oral hearings. But we generally hear from about 40 to 60 community groups or people, and then with final decisions and deliberations scheduled for June, and then adoption and striking the rates in late June for effectively 1 July start for the new rating year. So that's it.
Okay. So just for those, CD means consultation document. So that's the document that goes out, that we engage with the public. And I'm really keen to see how we as elected members can be out there with the community engaging on what we are proposing. So looking at how we can do that, you know, across the wards as well. So it may mean a bit more differently to what we've done in the past. And then there's the other aspect to bring into this will be the triennium plan, about what impact, you know, that might have on the annual plan, and how we merge this in to whatever we might need to consult or engage on. Any questions? Oh, great. Thank you, everyone. Some sobering news for to take us into the new year, but I think there's opportunities as well for Wellingtonians. Thank you.